Hey, they. What's up, motherfuckers? It's time for the biannual Random Drunk Ass Anime History. The only show about anime history that only comes out once every 2 years. In case you missed my previous video, which came out 2 years ago, called Random Drunk Ass Anime History Robots, over on the main Digibro channel, in that video I spent like 20 minutes or something, like drunkenly rambling about the whole history of robot cartoons. And it was a good time, and back then I didn't do a lot of vlogging, so I wasn't sure how frequently I wanted to do it. I also wasn't sure how frequently I wanted to be that drunk. And I wasn't much of a vlogger back then. But now that I vlog all the time, and I recently was going back through all my old videos and looking at stuff, I thought, why not resurrect this series from the dead? I vlog and drink all the time now, so no worries anymore. So I want to talk about the history of moe and lolly anime. And this is not going to be as informed and structured as the robots one. This one is more based on observations, because there's less of a clear line of influence or a clear line of where culture was going. It's more just stuff I know that I can pull out of my head. See, there seems to be this sort of perspective that a lot of fans have who don't know anime history that well, that there was some kind of major shift in the 2000s, where anime went from being about, like, robots and action and then became about cute girls or something. And to some extent you could say that that might be true, but I think it's very misguided, and it certainly misunderstands the culture surrounding anime going throughout all these decades. See, cute girls and lollies have always been popular in anime. Always. Since the 70s. Since forever. There were, like, these, cultish, fanatic sects surrounding each character for as long as those characters have existed. The concept of waifu has been around for all time, even if the word was not there. People have always been obsessed with the fictional characters depicted in anime and manga, including Mr. I Hate Otaku himself, Hayao Miyazaki. There's one interview where Miyazaki describes how he got into anime. And he said that he was going to the theater all the time to see the animated film Hakujaden, which is like a classic 60s anime. And he said that he said that the main girl was like a girlfriend to him at a time when he didn't have a girlfriend, is how he described it. And he would go to the theater to see this movie all the time because he was so obsessed with this girl. So, a waifu. You get it. It's a fucking waifu. Fucking Miyazaki. So, Miyazaki then just goes and makes a million movies full of waifus. Every movie he's ever made has had an attractive woman in it. And the funny thing is that when you look at a lot of 70s anime, you can very clearly see this distinction between, like, the boy characters are always like these roguish, ragamuffin kids who just are like, their design is just whatever. They're just like wearing cloth. And then the girl is always like blue hair and like cool looking clothes. If you watch Isao Takahata's, the guy who founded Ghibli, his first film, which was Horace, the Prince of the Sun. It's like the main character, Horace, is just like wearing rags, and he's just like a black-haired kid with a spear who runs around and stabs stuff. And then the main girl has like this super cool outfit that's very like Nazca-esque, and she's just this beautiful like waifu girl. And like then you go and look at Miyazaki's debut work, Future Boy Conan, exactly the same style of character designs for the guy and the girl. There's just always been this fixation on making the female characters beautiful, and I think something which is just, I don't know, fundamentally misunderstood about Japan from a Western perspective is that, like, not to sound too stereotypical, but Japanese people are tiny, like, and just Asians in general. Like, look, I'm only 5'8". I am relatively short. Like, for an American man, for a white American guy, I am pretty short. Most of the people I know are taller than me. Most of the people I run into out on the street are taller than me, right? Now, I went to the Philippines one time, and I was the average height. I was one of the taller, like, I was as tall as anybody else around me. And the other white people who were there, like every white person in the Philippines would be like, way the fuck up here. Like all these huge motherfuckers. Every other white guy in the Philippines was giant. All these giant, massive American and European people walking around. And I'd see them, they'd be like mythical creatures. Like, fuck, like emerging into the crowds of, of same height as me Asian people. Like I was probably the shortest white guy in the whole fucking country. Not that there were a lot of white guys in the country, but my point being, Asian people are small. Like, it's just a fact of nature. I have a friend, my friend Brandon Tolentino, who's half Filipino, is like this tall on me and tiny. His bone structure is minuscule. He looks like a fucking lolly, and he's 23, So, I think that there's a perspective in the West where we see Japanese characters and we kind of think like they look tiny, or they look like children, or they look like a younger. Like, why are they drawing this woman as a younger woman? And I don't think they are a lot of the time. I think Japanese people are just smaller than Americans realize. So I've never had this whole perspective that that they're drawing them to look especially tiny. Now, I will say, though, that one of the funny things about anime in particular is that they have a tendency to draw adults exceptionally taller because they want to visually communicate how old all the characters are. And so you'll have a show where, the main characters are all, 18, so they're adults, they're pretty much done growing, but then the adults in the story will be much taller because to visually communicate that they are the adults. And almost every fucking show is guilty of this, and I always find it really fucking funny, but but my point is that, if you even look at the heights of these characters, one of the funniest fucking moments of my life, I've been reiterating for years, is I was playing Soul Calibur 2, and I went into the character bio screens, and I saw Siegfried, and Siegfried is this gigantic German white guy, blonde dude, who's in this heavy fucking armor, carries a giant sword, he transforms into Nightmare, he's huge, he's the main guy of the game, and if you go into his bio, he is 5'8". He is my height, because to the Japanese, that is the normal man height, is 5'8". So that's what they made him, even though, if you look at his character sprite, he looks enormous. So it's just funny in that way, the way that Americans versus Japanese sort of perceive height and body structure. So even back then, even in the 70s, I think that in the early days of anime, a lot of character designs were a lot more realistic. Or at the very least, they were a lot less detailed. They tended to draw characters sort of more amorphously in a way that makes it so you can project more onto them. So they kind of feel more human, and they feel more real, even though they're deliberately less detailed. But even back then, most of these women looked really tiny. And there are, I remember seeing a magazine clipping once from 1987 or something like that. That was the top 20 lollies in anime. This was from a magazine. But number one was Nazca of the Valley of the Wind. Because at the time, lolly just meant like young girls. Like it didn't really matter that they were like specifically tiny girls, but it was just like young girls were lollies essentially, and it had this list of all the top lollies. So this element has been there in anime culture from forever ago. It was not something that came about in the last 15 years, like so many people seem to think about like the idea. Sorry, I'm getting some more wine. I'm pouring it from this box. Whew. So as time went on, and otaku culture sort of became a thing, even before it had a name, when it was just, a bunch of fucking nerds hanging out in colleges and becoming obsessed with anime, there was definitely this sort of, waifu culture emerging. People started making plastic models where, like, figures, a lot of which were, like, homebrewed, or they'd sell kits to make them, based on anime characters. And if you look at late 80s and early 90s, especially in the early 90s anime, like a lot of the OVAs, there's this very much like cult of the cute girl character. Like almost there was one time I watched like everything made in 1991, and almost every OVA was like based around a cute character design. Like some cute girl that they had made up, and they based the show around this cute girl design with the hope that that would carry it, that would be popular, that they could sell models of that, or posters or whatever. There was just, everything was based around like making a waifu. And in those times, sci-fi and fantasy were the most popular nerd genres, so most of those shows would be either a sci-fi or a fantasy with some really tough chick as the main character, and she'd fucking fight monsters or whatever. They were usually kind of goofy, but kind of violent, have a little bit of story, but not really. It's just all these like fun OVAs that were more about the animation and the cute girls than they were about having an interesting story. And that's what a lot of the late 80s and early 90s stuff was. And it's funny because so many people remember only the best stuff of the late 80s, early 90s. People remember the Miyazaki stuff. They remember Akira. They remember, the really famous, popular stuff from that era. But I don't think that stuff was at all indicative of what was actually happening in that era. Just like Death Note is not indicative of what 2006 anime mostly was, or Attack on Titan is not indicative of what 2013 anime mostly was. Like the shows that got really big were not necessarily the ones that were the most tied to the culture of the time. So I think that if you looked at the broader scope of what anime was in those eras, it was more a bunch of schlock. It was like a lot of schlocky sci-fi and fantasy stories that were either super violent or just really cute and fun. And I think a huge part of why things moved in this cute girl direction in the 80s was that as more and more like romantic comedy mangas were coming out and stuff aimed at like older teens and young adults, then the girls were just getting cuter. Like Mitsuru Adachi girls would get cuter, and then Rumiko Takahashi especially starts making like Urusei Yatsura, and you have Lum, this character who was like iconic for her sex appeal, just this demon alien girl in a fucking leopard skin bikini or cheetah skin or whatever. And I think that the emergence of Lum and characters like that in the early 80s made it so everyone wanted to have that. Everyone wanted to have their cute girl. And so there's a ton of them from back then. But most of these are just 1 or 2 episode OVAs that no one remembers. So these characters have not survived time the way that like a lot of the waifu characters from the early 2000s that people still talk about and are still popular is because those shows were longer and people had more time with those characters to get to know them. Those 91 OVAs I watched, like, was there a fucking bike race happening outside? Am I in the 80s? A lot of those early 90s characters are forgettable because the OVAs were forgettable. So even though they had these really strong character designs, almost all the girls had the same personality. It was always just like fun action girl type character. Like, that was pretty much it. And you didn't get a lot of, like, variety, and every show wanted to have Lum, essentially. Now, in 1984, some kind of law was changed in Japan. I don't know exactly the context of it, but in 1984, the OVA became a thing because of the way that laws changed and allowed for studios to start releasing straight to video home releases. And the first OVAs that came out, one was Dalos, which was an OVA by Mamoru Oshii, the famed director of Ghost in the Shell. He basically created the idea of the OVA with Dalos. Something he doesn't get enough credit for a guy who gets a lot of credit for a lot of other stuff. Not a lot of people bring that up, but I only found out about it like relatively recently, so I was like shocked. But also, that year, porn started. That was when porn anime became a thing. And the first one ever was called Lolita Anime. It was an anime, a 6-episode OVA series about a bunch of lollies. But again, lolly didn't exclusively mean like tiny girl at the time. It just kind of meant younger girls. So it was all just like, teenage girls, kind of the same body types that you'd expect from any porn nowadays, although no giant flopping tits or anything like that. But it was just realistic looking, kind of, like, because back then the character design sense was more not so like everything is super clear lines and lots of details like what modern anime looks like. It was more simple back then. But the first one ever was Lolita Anime, followed immediately by the much more famous Cream Lemon, which ran for 40 episodes. And that was like right afterwards that started coming out. So that's usually remembered as the first. But if you look at the actual dates, Lolita Anime was first. But like, so this concept of lolly, of Lolita, of the cute girls, this has been a thing forever. In the 80s, it was already a big deal. But I think it's the nature of how they went about delivering these things that changed. Because in the 90s, again, the cute girl OVAs were action and sci-fi, because that's the genres that were popular at the time. People loved sci-fi. That was what nerds were all about. And then over time, it kind of shifted, and I think it was because of the 90s and the emergence of dating sims. Now, keep in mind, all of this was like generated by the same people. Some of the earliest dating sims were made by Gainax. Some of the earliest figures were made by Gainax. If you watch Otaku no Video, they talk about how they sort of built this empire around these things, and that's what they were making. They created a Princess Maker, which was a series of raising Daughteru games, basically, where you find like a little girl and you raise her to be a princess, and they're incredibly hard because you have to teach her all these different things. If you've ever played God Save the Queen, I think that's what it's called, the Steam game, it's based on those, and they later made an anime that was a tie-in to these called Petite Princess Yushi. But anyways, in the early days, they started making these sim games, and they also made Gainax also made a bunch of strip mahjong games where they would make games out of their own characters. Like, there was like a Gunbuster strip mahjong game, and I think an Ava one where it is what it sounds like. So, porn games basically started becoming a thing in the early 90s, and then they started moving into dating sims and visual novels, where they were trying to tell stories with characters that just happened to get naked towards the end. And throughout the 90s, we see sci-fi and robots and all that stuff are still popular, but then as this trend of dating sims emerges and stuff, we start getting anime that are more along those lines, where it's more slice of life-y and more just about a bunch of cute girls hanging around. And I think there was a kind of like 1-2 punch of two different cultures, right? Because we had these Rumiko Takahashi manga that have always been popular, stuff like Ranma 1/2. And I think like almost every harem comedy today is basically just Urusei Yatsura or Ranma 1/2. Like, those defined what all of these fucking things have become over the years. All of the raunchy comedies, the just, get a bunch of characters, have them constantly misunderstand each other and do nothing. Like your Two Love Ruse or your fucking Nisekois, all of these owe a heritage back to Urusei Yatsura and Ranma 1/2, but they've gotten raunchier over time. Although I don't know, arguably less, because Ranma had actual tits in it, but it was usually not in like a super sexual context to the way like Two Love Ru is just like porn, So through the 90s, the genre starts shifting, and I think the 1-2 punch we got was Love Hina and To Heart. Because as we started getting these more popular visual novels, To Heart was like the first one to get an anime adaptation that was just like, it's a high school show, there's a bunch of girls, vying for one guy's attention. They all have different colored hair and different gimmicks. One's a robot girl and all that stuff. And it's like the prototypical harem visual novel adaptation anime. And then you have Love Hina, which was the ultimate harem manga, where it was like just a guy surrounded by girls in goofy scenarios. I mean, it's basically just Ranma 1/2, but with less ideas and more perversion. So I think those sort of started ushering in this new wave where it was more and more cute girls, and more of the show was about, oh, we don't have to have a cute girl main character. We can have 20 cute girl main characters, and they can all orbit the main character. And then we don't have to sell one figure. We can sell 20 figures, So, and I don't know if it was that cynical that they went about it, but like, I really do think that a huge part of moving towards these harem shows was that we had more than one girl, whereas the 90s was every show had the one girl, Ava could be accused of contributing to this as well, because, everyone had their favorite between Rei, Asuka, and Misato, and so all three of them became highly marketable waifu characters, and Ava played a big part in popularizing this kind of character design, where it was moving farther away from realism and more into these more detailed designs that were more sleek and thin, whereas like I would say 80s designs would be more like, look up Haruhiko Mikimoto, who's currently doing designs for the train show, the zombie train show. The fuck is it called? Cabaneri of the Iron Fortress. More like big hair, cool, sleek design. He was like one of the coolest designers from that era. Whereas the 90s became like Ava, and it's like more detailed and bigger eyes and more of this distinct anime look. And I think that over time we kind of evolved from there. In terms of cute girls, because like, I think when most people think of the 90s, they think more like Sailor Moon or something and like big bug eyes, but I don't think those had as much of an impact on the moe thing as something like Ava did, where, if you look at the designs in To Heart or Love Hina, they feel more like Ava than they do like the rest of the 90s. So I think that's the progression we kind of got on. And so, while this idea has existed for all this time, there is definitely a moment where it explodes. And again, I don't think the intentions of all those old sci-fi shows were really that different. I don't think the intentions of all the 90s OVAs, like Bubblegum Crisis or even maybe Gunsmith Cats, like, they definitely wanted to have waifu characters. They just mixed that in with the genre stuff. And anime was about genre. It was about sci-fi or action or pulp or, something genre specific. And I do think that if there's a shift, it's in that it stopped being genre and it started being about cute girls. It started being like, well, instead of cute girls mixed with something else, let's just make shows about cute girls. And that's sort of where we moved. So, at this turn of the millennium, in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of the big visual novels and dating sims really took off. This is where you got Key making Canon and Air and Clannad a few years later. You've got Higurashi coming out, and that was more in like the line of this popular thing called light novels that was coming around, where they had these weird dark stories that took the style of anime and video games and combined it with these dark urban settings. I've talked about those enough. That should be the next random drunk ass anime history now that I think about it, is fucking light novels. I mean, I've talked about those a lot, but I wouldn't mind doing it again. Actually, you know what? My video about light novel trends covers everything I have to say, so never mind. Just go watch that video. That video is good. So anyways, Higurashi sort of played into both of those trends, being like a cross between them, and the stuff by Type Moon I would describe similarly. But all these visual novels and dating sims started getting popular, and then anime started adapting them. And in the mid-2000s, we saw a lot of those adaptations. And at the same time, we saw imitators of Love Hina and all these harem animes starting to emerge at the same time. And then we also had this other trend that started emerging of cute girls doing cute things in funny scenarios, which Azumanga Daioh is often seen as like one of the first of those, where it was just a high school show about a bunch of girls who each had like a distinct personality just doing things with no male character inclusion. So it was a lot less focused on the like porn aspect of it. There was a lot less of the like, I want those girls as my waifus, and more just the pleasantness of just a bunch of cute girls doing whatever. And so I'd say those are the three strains of a cute girl show that have become popular over the years. Strain one being strain one being the dating sim shows, which evolved over time and have kind of been phased out. Like, the dating sims and visual novel adaptations became way less popular after, like, I would say, like, Clannad was, like, the last super big one, or, like, Little Busters, and since then it's just kind of diminished, and we don't really get a lot of those anymore, because most of them are fucking terrible, and they're all basically the same. So I think it's kind of a dead, or at least dying genre, that nobody cares about anymore. And then with manga, with the harem stuff, we started moving towards, again, like, Nisekoi, To Love Ru, all these other popular ones, Negima, which was the next one from the Love Hina guy, who he transformed it eventually into more of a shonen action series because he didn't want to do another harem, but they wanted him to, the publishers. So you've got the harem genre evolving, and then I think what happened in the mid-2000s was that the harem genre and the light novel thing kind of combined into one. So at some point, we started getting back to more genre-oriented stuff, where it's not just a bunch of cute girls, but there's also some kind of genre element. So the main character is usually a guy who's got his story that's some kind of sci-fi story, but then you've got all these girls who are just kind of around him, who don't really matter, but are there. And that's where we get the light novels like Sword Art Online and like the Asterisk War, and where the light novel trends have been going. Where it's all these shows where it's a guy who has his thing in some kind of futuristic, vaguely video gamey world, and then like a shit ton of girls who are just all over him. So it's the next evolution of the standard harem. I think the standard harem is mostly gone now. Like, after Nisekoi, we don't really have another like straight up. Like, last year we had, like, Jitsu wa Watashi wa, which was pretty good, and, like, I guess you could argue Yamada-kun, but that was more of a rom-com. So, like, I think the harems have mostly, just kind of dissolved into this light novel trend thing, where it is getting more genre-based, but it's now its own genre. Whereas, like, in the 90s, it was sticking cute girls into popular sci-fi stories that already were, like, a big deal. Now it's like light novels are their own self-perpetuating machine, where the genre is light novel, and they're all the fucking same. Then you got the cute girl shows, and those have kind of just continued as is ever since Azumanga Daioh. You know, I would say that they hit their zenith with K-On!, you know, like, Hidamari Sketch, Lucky Star, and K-On! Are like my triple threat of the best ones that came out of that whole craze. Strawberry Marshmallow is a great show, and we're still getting pretty good ones. Sancha Sanyo this season was pretty okay, but like they're all kind of the same. It's kind of stagnant at this point, and I really think that there hasn't been like a super inventive, like cute girls show since Lucky Star and K-On! Like I think that K-On! Kind of did everything you could do with the concept, and now we're just kind of still here, you know? So, not to say that the shows can't be good, but there hasn't been one that I think proved its need to exist since then. But yeah, so that's kind of where I think the trajectories have gone for all these moe and lolly shows. And the lollies, of course, over time became like a different, more distinct thing, where like lolly came to mean not just all little girls, but the ones who are like really little, you know. And I think that trend happened in the mid-2000s too because of the internet. Because when the internet came around, everything became about tags and categorization. See, when we moved into this era of that I described of like having multiple cute girls per show, then each one had their trait, right? Like, if you look at Negima, it's like the ultimate example, because there's like 30 girls, and each one has their one moe thing. This one's the glasses girl, this one's the robot, this one's a ghost, this one's a dojiko, you know, and like each one has that very distinct trait. And this is where we get into where the concept of otaku as database animal, as what's his name, Hiroki Azuma, something like that, called it, where he was saying that otaku are all about categorization and like enjoying things categorically more so than out of them being interesting on their own. Like, for instance, when one of these cute girl shows comes out, it's not about each girl's narrative, it's about their trait, their categorical trait that we're attracted to. If you've heard me using the word categorical in my anime reviews, this is why I use it that way. Like having a categorical attraction to a pink-haired girl voiced by, Ai Kakuma, as I said in the Asterisk War videos. And I don't completely buy into Azuma's idea because I think there's more to it than that, but I do appreciate that in the mid-2000s, because of internet searching and tagging, I think that these tags became a big deal. And something like lolly came to really mean little girls, because when you were searching lolly as a tag, that's what you would get, and it becomes more and more specific over time. And there's sort of these tag fetishizations and the way that you search for things on porn sites really started to define the way that characterization happens, because now, you know, originally you had a clumsy girl in a show and people called her a dojiko, and now you make a dojiko, you make a clumsy girl. And this is why tsundere became so over the top, because like, you know, a few of those characters emerged and people started using the term in like the early 2000s, and then all of a sudden it became like a thing that exists, and now there's a tsundere archetype in a show. This is kind of what my whole Asterisk War Part 4 video was about. But yeah, so I think that contributed a lot to why all these things have such clear definitions, why lolly became a tag for, you know, younger girl characters. Everything that anime is now, when it comes to moe and lolly and cute girls and being waifus and all that shit's been integral to the culture of anime since the beginning. It's just that the culture became what is producing the shows. You know, in the 80s, Yoshiyuki Tomino made Mobile Suit Gundam, and he had the character Sayla Mass, who was like probably the most attractive female character in the show. There's like a scene where she takes a shower, and I read an article where apparently people would go into the theater and like take pictures of the scene where she's in the shower when the Gundam movies were coming out and like share these amongst each other. You know, Tomino didn't anticipate that. He did not want that. But that's the culture that emerged out of Gundam. And those are the people who later went on to make shows about characters that you would want pictures of, about saving screen caps from your favorite fan service show as it comes out each week, you know. So I think that, you know, it's like the inmates are running the asylum, essentially, is why anime has become more and more about cute girls over the years, and why it's sort of escaped from tying them into a genre, because in the 90s and 2000s, sci-fi stopped being interesting. And the reason sci-fi stopped being interesting is that we live in the fucking future! Because there came a point when computers became a thing where all the mysticism of sci-fi just kind of evaporated. And now you can still do sci-fi, but it's almost all singularity stories now. You know, now you have to be Standalone Complex or Lane. And like those were kind of the last sci-fi that were moving into this era. And now if you do sci-fi, it's always throwback sci-fi because we know the fucking future's not going to look like that unless you're really advanced and it's the movie Her. Like that's the kind of sci-fi we have to do now because the whole flying car, crazy machine, giant telephone thing just doesn't make sense anymore. So I think because of the demystification of the world that came with the internet and the level of specificity that came out of the internet and search terms and the culture of everyone who watches anime is a fucking nerd who sits on their computer all day is all why we've had this movement towards more and more specific anime that are just about like how do we check off each box on the list that we have every cute girl type in our show. Alright, I think maybe that's it. I'll field some questions in the comments, because I have no idea how well I explained any of that, or if I left a lot of holes in my explanation. And again, this is not nearly as streamlined and scientific as the last random drunk-ass anime history, just because this stuff isn't... I feel like I'm the historian for this. Like, there's nobody else who seems to trace these trends. Most people who like older stuff tend to view it as not being like now. People tend to look at the 80s because they like the robots and they like the genre trappings and sort of turn a blind eye to the fact that the cute girls from back then are the same as the cute girls from now. And so I think there's not as many people going back to the 90s to watch those shows for the cute girls. And nobody now is doing it because why would you? You've got such specific, tailored to your interests, cute girls around these days that you don't have to watch like 40 OVAs worth of the exact same kick-ass anime chick with like a funny hairdo, like I did when I watched all the 1991 shows. So, yeah, maybe this is the best history lesson on the internet right now, but it's not complete, and don't just completely take it all at face value, but do take my word for it because I'm smarter than everybody and I know my shit. So there we go. Peace.